So it is time for Making Connections, our weekly interview segment. And to give a little intro to our guest today, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, is changing the way we consume culture. Lockdowns and social distancing measures mean that many of us are finding a lot of solace and spending a lot of time in front of our computer screens or smartphones. But there's also sort of a counter movement. Some are returning to retro hobbies like reading a paper book or paper comic book, or even playing board games. So joining us today is Joey Kroner, a local business owner who's been living and working in Seoul for the past 10 years. For the past 5 years, he's been running a popular venue for tabletop gaming and comic book enthusiasts. So we'll get to hear a story and talk about what he calls his communal play space. Good morning, Joey.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for coming in. All right, so let's start off with a couple of basics, getting to know you. Where are you from, and how did you get to Korea?
All right. Well, I'm from Idaho in the United States, and I originally just came to Korea to work and maybe pay off some student loans, do some stuff like that.
Was there any connection that kind of brought you to Korea, or?
Nothing seriously. I mean, my first connection is probably like my grandfather's wife was Korean.
I see.
And but that didn't bring me here specifically.
It was kind of almost random then. But the first time that you came was 10 years ago, and you kind of just stayed since then?
Actually, the first time I came was around 2002.
Okay.
And then I've come and gone since then. I came right after the World Cup.
Okay.
Yeah.
You missed a great party.
Yeah, it was a pretty big party. Yeah. Before that, I was, where was I right before that? I was in the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you must have liked it, and you came back in 2010, because it's been 10 years now?
It's been a bit over 10 years.
All
I came
right.
back in 2008, and I worked at Sugmyeong Women's University
I see.
for 6 or 7 years.
Okay. And then you became a business owner. I know I'm kind of like fast forwarding. What prompted the change? Were you always a big board game fan, or were you really into comics back in the States?
Growing up, I was into comics quite a bit, and then I was on hiatus from that for a while. I've been into board games for quite a while, but I think I just, what prompted it is I needed a change in kind of scenery, a change in career, and my wife was the one that really kind of pushed me into it.
Okay. Did she come up with the idea of a board game cafe? I mean, there was a time, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, but I do recall seeing quite a few of them over the past 5 or 6 years, I think. I started seeing more of them sort of pop up when the kind of the neutro or retro trend sort of began. I'm not sure exactly how long that trend continued. Obviously, you're still doing okay. So, I mean, what kind of prompted that business idea, and tell us about how you started it.
It was my wife's suggestion, actually, because I had been frequenting 1 or 2 game cafes and enjoying myself. And she's like, well, why don't you just open up one
Save
of your
up
own?
money and then
So
make some money at the same time.
So we opened it up. I tried to do kind of things a bit my own way and do things a little differently. So instead of calling it a game cafe, I did call it a community play space, because then I'm not exactly just tied down to board games. I could do other types of tabletop games or other types of just kind of social entertainment and stuff like that.
Can you explain a little bit more of that in detail? So like with regular board games, I think just people come in, they sit in their own groups and they play a game for a couple of hours, they have a drink and then they leave. But with the communal play space, it feels much more like a community, and like there would be maybe events bringing all of the people there together playing a single game or so?
Yeah, correct. I do a lot of events. Lately, I haven't been able to plan as many events as I used to. But one of the things about just being a community play space is then I have events like I'll do a lot of role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing. And that brings in a lot of people. And I'll also do things, I've done some book club types of stuff and I've even done one or two video game tournaments and that kind of thing too.
Very good. So it is definitely a communal play space where people can engage in all types of games and play together.
Yeah.
I can't help but think that you must have taken a huge hit over this pandemic then, and the various levels of social distancing over the past couple of months.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough. The first time we got a case that was reported in my neighborhood, it was the Dungeons and Dragons night. We do every Wednesday. There's a Dungeons and Dragons night.
Wow, blast from the past, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it has a big resurgence, and my place was packed with Dungeons and Dragons players. And as soon as that report came up on the phone, and then right afterwards, my wife sent me a text message talking about it. I looked around and I was like, "Yeah, I got to stop this. I got
You
to
ended
shut
it right
down."
there?
No,
Okay.
I closed up and I told everyone when they were leaving that the next day I was going to close down.
Wow.
We had some cases just right across the street from some businesses, and we just decided
To play it safe.
yeah, close down for it's about 10 days.
Kind of curious. Who are these Dungeons and Dragons players? Are they mostly? Are your clientele mostly foreign, or are you having
It's
a more
a
of a
mix.
Korean? Okay.
Actually, I think overall about maybe 85% of my clientele are Korean.
I see.
And most of the D&D players are foreigners. There
Right.
is a very vibrant Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing game community in Korea. And occasionally we have some of those players that come into our shop.
But if 85% of your clientele are Korean, are they, and I imagine a lot of them are quite young as well, are they also kind of curious about these old sort of games from the West that they may not have grown up with, but it's, kind of this neutral, retro trend, and they're interested in learning about it?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in it. I have a few display cases up in my shop that just have some games that are older, things on display. And one of those things is some very old copies of Dungeons and Dragons. So I have a magenta box from the early 80s that is one of the earlier... it's an earlier printing of Dungeons
Sorry, a
and Dragons.
blank look is coming. Yeah, I'm not a
And then
Dungeons right.
I've got a copy of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in Korean from 1995, which was the first role-playing game published in the Korean language. And
So that's a treasure
there's a lot of
find
interest
for
in that.
fans. Okay.
Yeah, a good friend of mine gave it to me.
Very good.
I also have a Nintendo Entertainment System that was my Nintendo from when I was a kid. And there's a lot of young people that come in,
yeah.
and they're very interested in it. And I'll plug it in and let them play it.
Wow, very nice.
So, and they'll enjoy it for a while.
Now, I understand that aside from these games that you offer, whether they're board games or like these old sort of Nintendo games as well, you also have a business distributing American comic books, and you're the only person in Korea, apparently. You are the sole distributor of these American comics through Diamond Distributors anyways?
Well, I'm not actually a distributor. I'm a retailer.
You're a retailer, I see. Okay.
So I get things through the distribution. There's two distribution companies that I use for comics, and maybe three. But yeah, I'm the only one selling like English language single issue comic books in Korea.
Very good. And again, interest is quite high?
Yeah. There's a fair amount of interest in it. People like reading them. When you do the single issues, you get them first. So that's nice. People like collecting them a lot too.
I imagine, yeah. When you say single issue, that means just one comic book and it's just issued as one? Or what do you mean by single issue?
Yeah. So American comics come in a few different formats.
Okay.
One you see a lot in Korea is like the trade paperback or the omnibus or the hardcover, which is a collected edition of single issues.
Okay.
And then the single issues are the periodicals. And they're around 24 to 32 pages most of the time.
And I think I saw a news report not too long ago, and it was talking about the sort of the resurgence of these comic books, the paper comic books, and people also wanting to see them, but also collect them as well. Again, this is happening because of the coronavirus lockdown. People's kind of going back to the pastimes that they used to enjoy when they were younger as well. But again, a lot of interest among the Korean public who you would think are more into either manhwa or webtoons, which are huge right now as well.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more popularity with that. But with American comics, one thing is I think they are more collectible in a way. So
more of an investment.
So
I
there's
guess.
interest in it. Yeah, there's comics that have been releasing in the last few months that before they even arrive at my store. That normally a comic book is maybe around $4 or $5. The cover price is
6,000 won, you mean? Around 6,000?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Per copy.
Yeah. But the number goes up and down based on collectability. And there's some comics that before they even show up in my shop are already worth maybe around 15,000 won, something like that.
Okay, 15,000 won.
15,000 won or $15. Yeah. So there's even been some over the lockdown time. There's been some comics that have been published to benefit comic book stores, which have been taking a big hit during this whole thing.
Absolutely.
And for example, Robert Kirkman, who did The Walking Dead, he did a one-shot comic called Negan Lives, and it was sent for free to stores. And some of those copies stores were able to sell for $300.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at your store, at your shop, people can buy these comic books, but they can also read them because like the Korean sort of comic tradition is you spend a little bit of money, but a lot of time inside these comic book stores and you go through the whole series kind of at one go. Was the old sort of business model anyways before Webtoons came along. Do you also kind of offer that sort of rental service?
I don't have any for rent. I do have some that I take out so that people can read them. If it's something where I want people to read a story that I think they'd like to buy or subscribe to the whole series, because we have a subscription service as well. And I'll put those out for free for people to read. And then we also have a espresso machine and all that stuff. So they can come in and have a cup of coffee and sit down and read. That's fine. Or they buy stuff and read it.
My brother was a huge comic book fan. I remember that he used to collect comic books all throughout his teens as well. He still has them, and he's convinced that he's sitting on a gold mine one day that will bring him lots of riches. But I never actually went through them that much, and I don't remember that he collected the sort of the comic, the superheroes that we usually see translated on the big screen now.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I mean, I think a lot of Koreans too. With American comic books, they may not have had the chance to come across them as they were growing up, especially the physical comic books.
Yeah.
And they may have just been introduced through these movies, you know, the Marvel or whatnot, or the DC. What would you say is the major difference between seeing them on the screen through these big movies and seeing them through these single sort of edition comics?
I think that one big difference, especially with the single edition thing, is that you're getting a book every month or every 2 weeks. That's another part of the story.
So it's mailed to you.
Yeah, I get them weekly.
Okay.
And you can come in and get for example, right now in Batman, there's an arc going on called the Joker War. So it started with number 95. You read number 95, then you got to wait a couple weeks to get number 96. And then it keeps coming. So that's...
You have to wait a week?
Yeah, sometimes you have to wait a little while. But a lot of people like that. Like I mentioned The Walking Dead before. And The Walking Dead as a comic book was released as black and white. And it went close to 200 issues. And there's people that read through the whole thing and enjoyed it from the start. And now they're re-releasing the whole thing in color. I think it starts next month. And there are people that already own most of the original Walking Dead run, but they want to read through it week by week or every couple weeks or every month, just one issue at a time again to experience it that way a second time in color.
For today's people who are so used to binge watching dramas or binge reading, you know, webtoons or whatnot in a single sitting, I think there's a counter sort of movement where people kind of yearn back to the days when we were forced to pace ourselves. We had to force ourselves to wait a week, God forbid, until the next edition came out. But there is a certain pleasure that and anticipation that builds over that week, which is almost as great as the actual pleasure that you take from actually when you consume it. So there is that great movement. Are you a big manhwa fan as well? I'm kind of curious.
I haven't really read
Or
I think I've read.
Webtoons.
I've bought a few manhwa and looked at them a bit, but I haven't, and I haven't done too much with Webtoons. Although I think they look interesting.
Just too different from American comics?
Just never got into it as much. I don't know. Maybe part of it is I'm also a collector, and that makes it interesting for me too. Mm-hmm. So
I believe Korean manhwa, like the physical paper works as well, they could become a collector's item. If you get in early, Joey,
I think
you might. There
some.
could be some investment value,
especially maybe
in that
when
as well.
I do have some people that order the English versions of manhwa.
True. Mm-hmm.
So I think like Kingdom of the Gods was the one that the Kingdom was based off of, and I had a copy arrive yesterday that a subscriber ordered.
Exactly. I mean, even webtoons are being made into physical books, or they're being reinterpreted into K-dramas or movies as well.
Yeah.
My brother even made me bring some English editions of Korean comic books and manhwa when I last visited him as well. And he didn't even open it. He's like, no, I'm just putting it into my shelf. It's just for investment purposes.
Supposed to buy two of them, then you read one and keep the other.
Like Comic-Con, I haven't actually been, but they're supposed to be huge. They feed that hunger. They feed the fandom of comic books. I think part of the fun, if not the majority of the fun for a lot of the people who attend this, is dressing up as their favorite sort of comic characters.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19, I understand it's been canceled this year, which was a huge blow. In Korea, we have kind of our own edition. It's the Bucheon International Comics Festival. And now in its 23rd year, it's ongoing actually right now. And they've managed to have this sort of hybrid on and offline event going on at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So obviously, you have not attended, or
I haven't attended the Bucheon one.
Right.
There is Comic-Con Seoul.
Oh, there is,
I've
okay.
attended that. I was actually going to have a booth at it this year. It's going to be in early August, but the event
that's
was
been
canceled.
also canceled as well here in Seoul.
And I had about 14,000 comics that I was shipping here to sell at it.
Did those come in?
They did. They're all in my store. So I have back issues in the store now going back to the late 50s and up to the present. And yeah, I have way more than I expected to be having at this time of the year.
Well, maybe you can organize a little mini Comic-Con via Joey's place. And
we actually did a thing, we called it Not Comic-Con, and did it the same weekend that Comic-Con would have been, and had some people over.
How important are these kind of events, though, to sort of keep the flame burning, I guess, for comic fans?
Yeah, well, it's one part of it, like you mentioned, community and community play space. So with any kind of business like this, a really big part of making it successful is having a thriving community of comic book enthusiasts or gamers and things like that. And that's what's going to keep it going. And those events are the things that help build that community where people kind of meet together under a common interest.
Where exactly is your board, your cafe, or communal play space?
The cafe, it's around Hegi Station. Hegi Station?
Hege?
Yeah,
Hege. Okay.
Yeah, in between like Gyeonggi-dae, Waydae, and Shiripdae.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so 3 universities in the area.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. Actually, for my last question, do you have any sort of special plans or maybe ambitious goals for your future, whether it's a new business or expanding your current one?
Well,
staying afloat, I think.
I got a couple things.
Yeah?
But yeah.
Tell
Well,
us.
there's a event it's going to be the Halloween weekend. So maybe as a bit of a safer alternative to going to crowded parties and stuff, we'll have we're going to have kind of a free comic book day thing. So normally that's an event in the United States that happens in May, but it was postponed and postponed again. And then the time I had planned to do it, it ended up having to be canceled because of the last resurgence of COVID. and now we're going to do it Halloween weekend. I have a ton of free comic books to give away, and one on Saturday of the weekend, that'll be the 31st. In Hyuk Lee, the comic book cover artist. He draws for Marvel, DC, and other ones.
Oh.
He's going to be there signing some books. And then the next day, we'll also have some kind of games and things like that. We have the people from Dark Side of Soul coming to do that as a joint event.
Right. We actually have a message from Cap and Mo. I spend my free time writing the second Dark Side of Soul comics. So I think it might be someone that you maybe know from the Dark Side of Soul as well. Right. So some great events. And again, a chance to discover American comics and also get a free copy at the same time as well. So lots of great events.
Yeah, maybe 4 or 5 free copies. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Joey Kroner, for coming in today. I know it's a little early for you, but really enjoyed talking about games and comics. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me.